What if the life you trusted was built on lies from the very beginning? She believed she had it all: love, security, a future she could count on. But behind every promise was a hidden truth, and behind every smile, a carefully guarded secret. When reality finally breaks through, it doesn't just shake her world, it destroys everything she thought she knew.
Please.
But in that destruction, something powerful awakens, because she refuses to stay a victim. She rises, stronger, wiser, and ready to reclaim what was always hers. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of awakening, resilience, and unstoppable strength. The lesson? The truth may hurt, but it also sets you free. Trust is earned, not given blindly. And sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to rebuild something stronger. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and support the channel. Your support is what keeps us going and helps us bring more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The smart hub screen on the kitchen's stainless steel fridge was still glowing when Clara found it. There was no explosive argument, no tear-filled breakdown, just a shared calendar notification left open by mistake. It was titled Founders Retreat Final Prep, but inside, nestled between meeting reminders, was a meticulously planned agenda. This wasn't for a business conference, it was a private getaway for her husband Leo and his lead designer Chloe. They had reservations for a couple's spa treatment, bookings for a private chef, and nights in a secluded lake house with floor-to-ceiling windows. Her entire world didn't shatter over an hour. It vaporized in the 4 seconds it took to tap open that event. She had been with Leo for a decade. She was 8 weeks pregnant with their first child. She had built her career architecting the marketing strategy that made his app a success. She believed they were co-founders in life. She was wrong. They planned this during his late-night coding sessions. They were designing a new future for him, one secret booking at a time. He told her he was meeting with investors. He told her he was debugging the new update. But there was one variable his perfect code didn't account for, one piece of data he could never have predicted. She was carrying the legacy he never intended, and her resolve was hardening, compiling down to its most efficient form. By the time he noticed she was offline, she had already archived their life together. By the time he came searching, she was already coding something he could never critique, never fund, and never take credit for. A future where his name wasn't in the user agreement. This is the story of a woman who lost her world in a single tap and the new platform she built from the wreckage in the days that followed. This will absolutely break your heart. It contains a lesson and profound value. This story is more than just about an affair. It's about that precise moment a woman realizes her own life's code is the only one she can trust. It's a powerful truth that your worth isn't defined by the partner who betrays you. It's forged in the resilience you discover after the system crash. No shared equity, no glowing tech reviews, no famous company name can hold you hostage unless you give them the admin password. And sometimes, the unicorn startup you thought you wanted has to burn to the ground to light the way to the one you truly need. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength or the strength of someone you know, drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were Clara? Hit that like button if you believe a woman's greatest project is her own life. Share this with anyone who needs a reminder of their power today. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss a powerful story. We release new ones every week, and believe me, the next one is a story you will not want to miss. Her world didn't end with the sound of a server crashing, but with the quiet, devastating tap of a finger on a screen. Chloe, her husband's lead designer, her name was on every reservation. She looked like she belonged in a sleek lakeside retreat in Austin, which, in a way, she did. She belonged in that agenda. She belonged to the secret. She belonged to the man beside her, the one Claire had woken up next to that very morning. Clara was still in her favorite worn-out university hoodie, the one with a faded logo from a hackathon, from a time long before she knew what it felt like to build a future with someone who was secretly developing another one without her. She stared at the screen, reading it again and again. The words felt like a system error, a glitch in the code. They couldn't be real. "What is this?" Clara whispered to the empty, minimalist condo. Leo's name next to hers on the screen was a fatal error. Tap. A reservation for a private yoga session for 2. Tap. A note about Chloe's favorite type of wine. Tap. A countdown to the end of her life as she knew it. She thought of their joint investment account, the money they were saving for their next venture, for the baby's future. $750,000. His texts from his investor trip were still on her phone. Every going into a meeting was a lie. Every wish you were here to see this pitch was a betrayal. His deception was so masterful, so perfectly coded, it left no room for doubt. The message was clear: you were never a part of this user group. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. It filled the sleek condo, buzzed in her ears, and settled on her chest like a dead weight. Leo. She had to hear his voice, to hear him explain the bug. He was supposed to be in San Francisco, a quick trip to pitch VCs. He'd kissed her goodbye at sunrise. She remembered his scent, strong espresso, and the clean fabric of his blazer. "I'll ping you after the pitch," he'd promised. He never did. Clara grabbed her phone from the quartz countertop, her hands feeling disconnected from her mind. She could see them shaking, which was odd because the rest of her felt like a frozen application. She called Leo's number, the one saved under My Co-Founder. It rang twice, then switched to his smooth voicemail. "You've reached Leo. Leave a message." She tried again. Same result. Same confident, unaware voice. A new kind of panic began to load. She sent a text. "We need to talk, now." The 3 little dots appeared, then vanished. Appeared, then vanished. He was debugging his response, protecting his project, protecting her. Clara stared at the name on the screen. Chloe, polished, brilliant, with a sharp haircut that looked effortlessly chic. She looked like an advertisement for a successful tech founder. She looked like the woman who had hacked her life. Leo would never just leave me, Clara thought. But the agenda was right there. He had already migrated, one reservation at a time, one lie at a time, and by the time she discovered it, their partnership, their brand, was a complete fraud. The smart doorbell chimed from the entryway, a soft, polite ring, a package delivery she'd forgotten she was expecting. The sound meant the world was still running, even if hers had just crashed. Clara looked around their home. A decade of her life was in this space. Her marketing awards on the shelves, her favorite hoodie on a hook, a framed photo of her and Leo at a tech conference, smiling about something she could no longer find amusing. She opened the hall closet and pulled out the old canvas duffel bag she used for weekend trips. It had a faint, comforting smell of old library books from their college days. She started packing in a daze. The glowing screen on the fridge watched from across the room, a silent monitor to the decommissioning of a life. 20 minutes. That's how long it took Clara to pack up a decade. 20 minutes for her clothes, 3 for her essentials, 1 for her most important notebook. She left the expensive smartwatch. She left the designer laptop bag Leo had bought her for their anniversary. She left the high-end espresso machine on the counter. She took the photo from the tech conference. She took her grandmother's old reading glasses. She took the ridiculous world's best marketer mug her brother had given her. The joint account, she thought, looking at her banking app. Let him have it, she decided. She didn't want his funding. It felt corrupted, part of the lie. Something flickered in her reflection on the dark phone screen, not despair, but a spark of a reboot. You are making a huge mistake, she could almost hear Leo saying. Maybe, she thought, but it will be my own startup. She walked to the front door, past the perfectly arranged art and the industry awards that lined the walls, past the life they had built that now felt like a product demo. She opened the door. The hallway air felt different. Muted, still. It was a hot day, and the light in the hallway seemed dim. She walked to her car parked in the garage, the reliable sedan she'd had since before his app was a success. It looked small and plain next to the line of luxury electric vehicles. She tossed the duffel in the back, got in, and turned the key. And then she looked up at their condo window, 15th floor. The lights were on. She imagined him there, maybe not now, but soon, with Chloe. He would bring her to their home, a place where Clara's things still were, where her ideas still lingered in the air. He was 36 years old and had built a company on user transparency, all while the architecture of his own life was a fraud. He was probably smiling, not the tired smile he gave Clara after a long week, but the smug smile of a man who thought he had executed a flawless plan. Clara felt a cold, sharp certainty move through her. Not grief, not yet. It was a primal realization that she had been living in a beautifully designed user experience, and the developer himself had just pushed a new version without her. Her car pulled away from the parking spot, blending into the city traffic. The click of her turn signal as she rounded the corner was quiet but final. A plastic tick, dull, absolute. She drove for nearly an hour before she pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour convenience store, a brightly lit beacon of normal life. She sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel. 10 and 2, just like her father taught her. She checked her phone, unlocked it, stared at Leo's last text, sent that morning at 7:15 a.m. "Have a great day, my love. Rock that presentation." She locked the phone, unlocked it, read it again, locked it, unlocked it, searched for a glitch, a hesitation, a crack in the facade. There was nothing. She tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and just sat in the quiet hum of the engine. A young couple pushed a shopping cart full of snacks past her car. A group of friends laughed as they walked toward the entrance. She didn't cry. God, she wanted to. But the tears felt inaccessible, trapped behind a firewall of pure, undiluted shock. She was 33 years old. She had a canvas duffel bag, a car with a half-empty tank of gas, and absolutely no idea what the roadmap for tomorrow looked like. She merged onto Lakeshore Drive. The journey to Olivia's Lincoln Park brownstone was a blur of brake lights and downtown skyscrapers. Chloe muted the architecture podcast she usually loved. She ignored the ping of an email from a potential client. She moved through the city in a silent bubble, watching the traffic signals change from green to amber to crimson, a rhythm completely at odds with the hurricane in her head. Olivia opened the door before Chloe's fist could even make contact. She must have been watching from the bay window as Chloe's car hunted for a parking spot. Olivia was like that, always perceptive. She took in Chloe's entire state in one glance, the ashen face, the weekender bag clutched in a white-knuckled grip. Olivia didn't ask for the story. She didn't let out a gasp or a shocked whisper. She simply opened her arms, wrapped them around her sister, and guided her inside. "The guest room has fresh linens," Olivia said, her voice a calm anchor. "I'm ordering a deep dish pizza in 5 minutes, and you are going to help me finish it." Chloe could only manage a nod, words trapped behind a lump in her throat. She sank into the worn leather armchair. Olivia sat on the ottoman nearby, a solid, reassuring presence in the quiet living room. For what seemed like hours, neither spoke a word. The apartment smelled of old books and brewing coffee. Outside the window, the distant rumble of the L train was a constant, comforting rhythm. A lone siren wailed in the Chicago night as one week dissolved into another. Chloe felt like she was moving underwater. Time had lost its shape, every moment feeling stretched and brittle. Her days became a meaningless loop of sleeping and waking. She'd only get out of bed when her sister, Olivia, gently coaxed her. She would mechanically eat whatever food Olivia placed in front of her. Most nights, she just lay there, tracing the ornate plaster work on the ceiling with her eyes, trying to imagine they were blueprints for a life that no longer felt like hers. She attempted to work. As a sought-after architectural photographer, she had a reputation for finding the hidden beauty in structures, a portfolio brimming with award-winning shots. In that first week, she got 2 major project offers. She read the enthusiastic emails and then simply let them sit in her inbox, unanswered. Calls from her agent, which once brought a jolt of excitement, were now ignored. Each voicemail ending with a worried, "Chloe, please, just text me to let me know you're all right." Friends who sent concerned texts received non-committal, single-word answers. One client, a major firm waiting on her proposal for a new skyscraper project, finally sent a message that was both firm and compassionate. "Chloe," it read, "I'm going to have to move on with another photographer. Please take care." That project had been a dream job, a career-defining opportunity, but something held her back. It was the image of Marcus's face, the way his jaw tightened when he turned away during their final argument, a crushing, invisible pressure she couldn't escape. On the 15th day, Chloe woke to a violent surge of nausea. She ran to the bathroom, her body convulsing as she clung to the cold ceramic of the sink. It had to be the stress, she reasoned. It was just her body's delayed reaction to the past 2 weeks, to the sleepless nights and the fog of anxiety that had settled into her very bones. The sickness returned the next morning and the morning after that. On the third day, Olivia stood in the bathroom doorway, arms crossed over her chest, as Chloe splashed her face with cold water. "When was your last period?" Olivia asked, her voice gentle but firm. Chloe froze, her wet hands hovering over the faucet. "I don't even know," she whispered. "Try to remember." Chloe's memory was a chaotic montage of deadlines, gallery openings with Marcus, and the sharp, piercing memory of him grabbing his coat and leaving. But then a specific date emerged from the fog. Their anniversary, a weekend trip to Lake Geneva. 6 weeks ago. No, wait, it was longer. It had to be closer to 2 months. 2 months, Chloe said aloud, the words feeling foreign and heavy. Olivia left the room without another word and came back 15 minutes later holding a small paper bag from the pharmacy on the corner. Inside were 3 boxes, each a different brand of pregnancy test. Olivia was always thorough. Chloe used all 3. She slid down to the cool, hexagonal tiles of the floor, her back against the old clawfoot tub, hugging her knees as the 3 plastic wands sat on the marble vanity, silently sealing her future. The exhaust fan whirred, a monotonous drone in the otherwise silent room. 3 minutes. The instructions promised an answer in 3 minutes, a tiny sliver of time that stretched into an eternity. With trembling legs, she finally stood and forced herself to look. 1 pink line became 2, a plus sign appeared on the second, and a digital pregnant glowed on the third. A perfect, devastating consensus that offered no escape, no glimmer of doubt. Chloe remained on the bathroom floor for a long time after, losing all track of time. It was long enough for the afternoon light to soften and cast long shadows through the window. Long enough for Olivia to knock softly on the door and ask, "Is everything okay in there?" "I'm pregnant," Chloe said, her voice sounding thin and alien against the tile and porcelain. She wasn't just telling Olivia, she was telling the fan, the universe, and whatever cosmic entity had such a twisted sense of humor. 2 months pregnant with Marcus Thorne's child. The man whose recent texts were all variations of the same empty question, "When are you coming home so we can talk?" The man who was probably, at this very moment, sipping champagne at his gallery with his new star artist, Anya. Chloe dropped her head into her hands, a choked sob escaping her lips. "I was so blind," she mumbled into her palms. The evidence had been there for months. The late nights he blamed on schmoozing clients. The new, ridiculously expensive cologne he'd started wearing. The way he always tilted his phone screen away from her whenever a notification from a certain artist lit it up. She dropped her hands and glared at the 3 tests, lined up like soldiers on a mission to ruin her life. "I have to tell him." Olivia was now leaning against the doorframe, her expression hard to read. It was the face she made when she was suppressing her own rage. "And what do you think he's going to do?" Olivia asked. "His gallery is his fortress. You know he never discusses personal matters there." "I'll go there," Chloe said, the idea cementing itself in her mind. "I'll go to the gallery tonight. He can't just brush me off if I'm standing right in front of him." But she had a sinking feeling that he could. That afternoon, Chloe sat at Olivia's desk, her fingers hovering over the laptop's trackpad. It started innocently enough. She logged into her email to forward a work contract to her agent, and that's when she saw it. An email from Marcus sent to her by mistake an hour ago. The subject line was FWD, Weekend Itinerary. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She clicked it open. It was a forwarded chain, a conversation between Marcus and Anya. It wasn't about art. It was a detailed plan for a romantic weekend at a secluded cabin in Wisconsin. It was filled with inside jokes and pet names she didn't recognize. "Can't wait to escape with you," one of Anya's messages read. Attached was a receipt for a private commission, a sculpture Marcus had told Chloe was a bold new acquisition for the gallery's private collection. The email had been meant for his business partner. The world seemed to stop spinning. Chloe felt the air get sucked out of her lungs, her own shocked face staring back at her from the dark screen. She didn't recognize the woman with the haunted eyes and colorless cheeks. With a shaking hand, she opened a new tab and logged into their joint credit card account. She didn't have to scroll far. Charge after charge at five-star hotels she'd never stayed in, Michelin-starred restaurants she'd never eaten at, and a recurring charge from a high-end floral service. The email chain was a diary of their stolen moments, mentions of a cocktail bar Marcus had always called their place. A reference to a joke she'd told him just last month, now retold for Anya's amusement. A flirty argument about his favorite old college sweatshirt, the one he was wearing in a photo with Anya she'd seen on the gallery's social media page. This was never just a fling. It was a carefully constructed second life. It felt like an erasure, as if someone were systematically deleting her from her own existence, memory by memory, and a careless click had just revealed the entire plot. That night, Chloe lay in the guest bed, staring at the Chicago skyline twinkly outside. She rested a hand on her still flat abdomen. "I'm going to be a mother," she whispered into the darkness. A mother to the child of a man who was living a lie. A mother in a city that now felt hostile and unfamiliar. Her phone vibrated on the bedside table. It was Marcus. A text message, impossibly normal, lit up the screen. She steeled herself for anger or confusion or anything but what she saw. "Hey, Liv said you were staying over," it read. "Hope you're not still upset. I was thinking of ordering from that Thai place you love tonight. Come home?" The sheer, clueless cruelty of it felt like a physical blow. It was the last piece of confirmation she needed. He believed she was simply upset. He was oblivious to what she knew. He had no clue that as he was offering to make her favorite pasta, she was staring at an early draft of his new novel, at a passage describing a love affair with his agent, using the very words he had whispered to his wife on their honeymoon. Olivia's hand clenched her phone, the screen illuminating her grim expression. The beat in her chest was a slow, deliberate march. Breathe in, breathe out. Each breath felt like it was forging her anger into a sharp point. There would be no tears. There would be no retreat. She curated art, stories told in color and form, and now she had her own ugly masterpiece. "I'm not staying here," she promised the silent apartment. "I'm flying to you." I swore to myself I would never be the woman who pleaded. Not for any man, and definitely not for him. The hotel bar was called The Alibi, a dimly lit space in downtown Denver, near the convention center where Julian was the keynote speaker. It smelled of old leather and expensive whiskey, a place where deals were made in hushed tones. Olivia had arrived early, ordering a sparkling water with lime, which made the bartender smirk. "Just water?" he asked, polishing a glass. "Big day tomorrow," Olivia replied, managing a thin smile. "Big life." She chose a small table in a secluded corner, offering a clear view of the entrance. Outside, the city lights blurred through the rain-streaked glass. A trolley car rumbled past. A group of friends huddled under an awning, laughing. The world kept spinning, entirely indifferent to hers about to stop. At 9 o'clock on the dot, the heavy wooden door swung open. Simone entered, her presence sucking the air from the room. She moved with the predatory grace of someone who always got what she wanted. She scanned the bar, and her eyes locked into Olivia's with unsettling certainty. She wore a tailored crimson pantsuit that likely cost more than Olivia's first car. Her hair was a severe, perfect bob. Her smile was a negotiation tactic. Olivia had seen her in photos, always standing just a little too close to Julian, a literary agent celebrating her star author. The perfect power couple. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Simone said, her voice polished and low. She remained standing, placing a sleek leather briefcase on the empty chair across from Olivia. "Have a seat, Simone," Olivia said, her own voice steadier than she felt. "You're the one who requested this, so speak." Simone sat, her posture flawless. She waved away the waiter. "I have no desire to cause you pain," Simone started, which Olivia knew was exactly the preamble someone uses before detonating a bomb. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a demonstration of power. "I have no desire to cause you pain," she reiterated, "but I will not remain a footnote." Simone then spent the following 20 minutes systematically deconstructing Olivia's marriage, not with rage, but with the cool detachment of a seasoned editor. She spoke of the night Julian got the news about his 7-figure advance. Olivia had been in Boston, installing a new exhibit. Simone had been with him in his New York hotel room, toasting with a bottle of scotch older than she was. She told the story of the faint scar above his right eyebrow, a story Julian always claimed was from a childhood fall. Simone knew the real version. It was from a year ago when he hurled his laptop against a wall in a fit of writer's block, and she was the one who calmed him down. Simone detailed his writing rituals, the way he arranged his research books in obsessive stacks, the way he'd pace for hours muttering dialogue to himself. She knew his deep-seated fear of becoming irrelevant, his desperate need to win the Pulitzer before he turned 40. These were not just facts. They were the intimate details of a life Olivia thought was exclusively hers. They had been constructing a world together, word by painful word, and Olivia was just realizing she hadn't even been given a key. Simone mentioned the worn first edition copy of a poetry book he kept on his nightstand. She said he'd read a passage from it to her last month, explaining it was the most valuable thing he owned. A wave of nausea washed over Olivia. The condensation on her water glass felt slick and cold against her fingers. "That was my gift to him. I spent 2 years tracking that down for his 30th birthday. I wrote an inscription on the inside cover. I am aware," Simone said softly, her gaze unwavering. "I know it was from you. He told me. He said the sentiment was lovely, but that the inscription felt like it belonged to a different character, from an earlier draft of his life." An earlier draft. Olivia's hands began to shake. The phrase lingered between them in the quiet bar, a line of dialogue more brutal than any profanity. Simone delivered the narrative climax. "He and I were at a writer's retreat in Vermont last month, finalizing the edits. That's when you called him with your news. About the baby." Olivia shut her eyes and the clinking glasses of the bar faded away. The scent of whiskey was gone, replaced by the smell of turpentine and canvas from 5 years ago. It was a Thursday evening at a chaotic gallery opening in the South End. A writer with haunted eyes and a rumpled jacket was staring intently at a chaotic abstract painting. He spoke about the piece with the passion of someone who understood the artist's intent, and she was drawn in. She had approached him, asking if a canvas of pure chaos could truly have a story. He'd turned, looking surprised and then utterly fascinated. "What's your name?" "Julian." "Is that supposed to mean something?" "Only that you're the author of that brilliant, depressing novel everyone is talking about." He gave a slight grimace. "That's what most people say. I find it's better not to be influenced by critics. That is a profound relief. So I'll have to convince you on my own merits then." He looked at her, truly saw her, not as a fan or another guest, but as an individual. "You haven't told me your name," he'd noted. "Does it matter? It would be a starting point. I'm not always great with beginnings, and your name won't change the fact you think my favorite painting is a mess." He had laughed, a deep, genuine sound. "Touché. Can I at least know the name of the woman who finds my taste in art questionable?" Olivia. Olivia. All right, Olivia. Since my literary fame clearly doesn't impress you, what would it take for me to buy you a drink? Julian, there's a line of people waiting to get their book signed by you. How about you start by giving your readers what they want? Is that a rejection? That's a not at this moment. He found her a week later at a lecture at the Museum of Fine Arts, waiting for her outside with 2 cups of coffee. I have no paintings to analyze this time, he said, so you have no artistic reason to refuse me. She had said yes. Their first date wasn't at a fancy restaurant. It was at an old, dusty, used bookstore he loved, a place that smelled of history and paper. A date Julian planned after she mentioned her love for stories that were forgotten. He'd said, "Perfect. I'm tired of places where you have to shout to be heard." They sat in a cramped aisle, the city lights glowing through the front window. He'd brought a thermos of hot chocolates. It was a little too sweet, and she didn't say anything because the homemade imperfection felt more real than anything else she'd experienced that year. He told her about growing up feeling invisible, the constant pressure to write something meaningful, the burden of chasing a story that felt bigger than him. "You listened to me like you were seeing the structure beneath the words," he'd said later that night. "You saw me as just a guy trying to build something, not the next great American novelist." Those memories were now a cruel fiction playing out in the hotel bar, a story she couldn't edit. Was any of it true? If he could write an entirely different narrative in the margins of their life, had he ever really been a part of hers? Or was he always the author first, and her husband second? Simone was studying her, her expression unreadable. "Why are you telling me all this?" Olivia asked, her voice breaking on the last word. "Because he made me a promise. He told me he would leave you after the book tour was over." She was being lined up not as his next chapter, but as a revised edition. "And I convinced myself I could wait. I thought, he's a genius. He's magnetic. This is the life I'm meant to have." Simone paused, and for a moment, Olivia saw a crack in her composure, something that looked like regret. But it vanished as her gaze hardened again. "But then I listened to him talk about you, about the baby, and he spoke about it like it was a plot complication, an inconvenient subplot that needed to be resolved. And I knew that if he could frame his own child that way, then what would I be to him in a few years? The moment I cease to be the exciting new character, I become you." Olivia nodded, not with sympathy, but with a cold, terrifying understanding. They were 2 women who had fallen for 2 different characters written by the same man. "What do you want from me?" Olivia whispered. "Nothing. I just think a woman deserves to know the true protagonist of the story she's in. The unedited version is yours now. Do what you will with it." Simone fastened her briefcase, left a $50 bill on the table, and walked out. Olivia sat alone. Her water was warm. A bartender was stacking clean glasses. The city lights outside glittered against the dark, wet streets. She watched the rain. A young couple hurried past the window, sharing an umbrella, their heads close together as they laughed. The man pointed at something in a shop display, and the woman leaned her head on his shoulder, their joy a small, perfect bubble against the storm. Olivia watched them until they disappeared, feeling a deep ache for a story that simple, for a love that didn't need an editor. The quiet harmony of 2 people in sync, sharing the same space, the same thought. She broke the spell, looking away to lift her mug and sip the now lukewarm coffee. Later that night, at 3 a.m. in her design studio, the light from her drafting table cut a lonely circle in the darkness. The air smelled of graphite and paper. She sat on her stool, her stomach pressed against the edge of the table, staring at the blueprints for a public park, but the lines were just a meaningless web. The lie, the feeling of wrongness, twisted in her mind like a discordant note. The low rumble of Chicago outside, the familiar scent of her work, the sheer weight of the life she'd meticulously built. A design award sat on a shelf, from a project just 6 months ago that had filled her with such pride. She laid a hand over her belly, over the soft swell that was still a secret from the world. but it was real. As real as the gnawing emptiness in her chest, as real as the smooth grain of the drafting table, as real as the tiny, blameless life that was, at that very moment, growing inside her. Her life. Sleep was a memory for Chloe. She existed in a hazy void between being awake and reliving the last few weeks on a painful, repeating loop. But slowly, through that haze, her mind was gaining a terrifying clarity. It was a focus sharper than any she'd had in years. The crushing weight of her heartbreak wasn't vanishing, but it was being forged into something colder, harder. A mission. This wasn't a mission of loud confrontations and shattered glass. It was the quiet, methodical kind that settles deep in your bones and whispers, find the inconsistency, locate the weakness, and push. She started with the plans, not the doctored versions Liam had shown her on his tablet, but her own archival files. She was a landscape architect. Her entire career was built on precision and flawlessly documented revisions. Her first mentor had taught her that a building can lie, but the blueprints never do if you know how to read their history. Chloe opened her secure cloud drive, pulling up every schematic, every render, every email she had ever shared with Liam about his skyscraper competition entry over the past 2 years. She arranged them on her screen, a digital monument to her unwavering partnership. Then she remembered something a junior designer had mentioned: a locked room, the final presentation model. She recalled Liam talking about the secure project room, a vault for the physical model they would present to the judges. He'd given her the access code months ago. The hint was the name of the first street they lived on together, Ashland. She keyed it into the panel. The lock clicked open. With every examination, her friend Mark's structural analysis software revealed a more twisted reality. He found microscopic inconsistencies in the model's assembly, showing how someone had subtly altered key support placements. The digital audit trail showed corresponding changes to the master blueprint, weakening the tower's core design. Years of Liam's work meticulously sabotaged, with every digital fingerprint pointing back to Chloe's user account. But the timestamps made no sense. 2 of the most critical alterations were logged while Chloe was off the network, giving the keynote address at a conference in San Diego. She knew this for a fact. She had the flight receipts and the event photography to prove it. And then Mark found the ghost in the machine, a trace signature from the user's input device. It had been routed through a dozen internal servers, but a fragment remained. It matched the unique ID of a high-end stylus, the kind issued only to the firm's lead designers. It took them almost 8 hours and 2 full pots of coffee, but they found her. By cross-referencing the stylus's serial number with the firm's IT asset logs, which Mark accessed through a friend who owed him a major favor, they got a name: Anya, Liam's brilliant new protege. Chloe sank onto Mark's couch, the room seeming to tilt. The floor was covered in printouts of code and file directories. Mark's golden retriever, Hubble, was sniffing at an empty pizza box. This was the proof. Anya had used her firm-issued stylus to manipulate the competition files, routing the changes through a proxy to make them appear as if they came from Chloe's account. Then she'd constructed a devastating narrative of betrayal for Liam. It wasn't just a lie, it was an act of creative vandalism, executed with a sociopath's precision and the kind of arrogance that comes from believing you are smarter than everyone else in the room. But the motive was a huge, gaping hole in the theory. Anya wasn't a rival. Her family had money, and she had a stellar career ahead of her at one of Chicago's most prestigious architectural firms. She drove a new Audi and lived in a gorgeous condo overlooking the river. She had absolutely no reason to destroy Liam's masterpiece. The answer surfaced the next afternoon. Mark, now operating on a cold, protective rage, had kept digging. He found Anya's private, password-protected portfolio blog. Pushing his laptop across the table over lukewarm Chinese takeout, he just nodded. Chloe started to scroll, her lo mein forgotten. The blog was a disturbing shrine dedicated to Liam. candid photos of him in the studio looking intensely at a model, long, fawning posts analyzing his design philosophy. And then she found the entries about herself. They were cruel, jealous critiques masked as professional concern. His vision is being tethered by a partner whose work is rooted in the ground, one post read. He needs a collaborator who can reach for the clouds, not just a gardener. The envy was a toxic fume rising from the screen. This was never about a job. It was about a hostile takeover of a life. Anya didn't want to replace Chloe on a project. She wanted to replace her entirely. The studio suddenly felt airless, the walls closing in. Chloe's hand instinctively went to her stomach. "When is Liam's final presentation to the judges?" she asked, her voice thin and brittle. Mark checked his phone. "Next week. If the design wins, he's on the fast track to a full partnership. He'll become a star." Chloe pushed her food away. It looked like poison. Anya wasn't just trying to frame her or break up her marriage. She was trying to surgically remove her from Liam's world right before his greatest achievement, positioning herself as the one who could help him heal from the wreckage. As long as Chloe was with Liam, especially with their baby on the way, she was the foundation of his world. And that foundation was in the way of a future Anya felt entitled to. She wasn't just being betrayed, she was being systematically erased. The baby inside her was the living, breathing evidence of a life Anya was determined to demolish and rebuild in her own image. The thought hit her like a wave of ice water. If she finds out I'm pregnant, the baby makes my place in his life permanent, and that makes us a target. She looked at Mark, who was watching her, his expression full of worry. "I can't tell a soul, not Liam. Not until I figure out what she is capable of." She told two people, Mark and her older sister, Olivia. She called Olivia on a Thursday night, knowing her sister, a high-powered corporate lawyer, would still be at her office in New York. Olivia would be redlining a contract, the lights of Manhattan glittering behind her as she did on most nights. She picked up on the first ring. "Liv," Chloe started, her voice cracking, "I need help." Olivia Russo listened. She didn't gasp, she didn't interrupt, and she didn't offer empty reassurances. She listened with the focused intensity of a woman who negotiated billion-dollar mergers, who had raised her two younger sisters after their parents died, and who had never once backed down from a fight. When Chloe finished, a broken sob catching in her throat, there was a pause just long enough for Chloe to hear the distant wail of a siren through the phone. "I'm pushing my morning conference call," Olivia said, her voice like polished steel. "I'll be on the first flight to O'Hare." "Liv, you can't just—" "Chloe Elizabeth Russo," Olivia cut her off. "I spend my days dismantling hostile takeover attempts. This one just has better architecture. You will not face this alone." Olivia arrived the next morning. She swept into Mark's apartment carrying a single leather briefcase that probably cost more than his sofa. She took in the scene, the chaos of blueprints, takeout containers, and server logs. She looked at Chloe. She saw the dark circles under her sister's eyes and the unconscious way her hand rested on her stomach. She didn't offer a hug. That wasn't how she operated. Not yet. Instead, she sat at the table, opened her briefcase, and took out a sleek, encrypted tablet. She put on a pair of sharp, black-rimmed glasses that made her look even more formidable. She had Mark walk her through every single piece of digital evidence, her fingers swiping through metadata and file histories. She did this for over an hour. Chloe and Mark just sat and watched. The only sounds were the quiet taps on Olivia's screen and the soft breathing of Hubble, who was now asleep on a pile of discarded schematics. At last, Olivia looked up, taking her glasses off and folding them with a crisp final snap. "This girl is a rank amateur," she announced, with a terrifyingly placid expression. "Brilliant people often are. They mistake academic intelligence for strategic cunning. They're not the same thing. It just makes them sloppy." She picked up a stylus and began to annotate screenshots, circling Anya's procedural mistakes. The mismatched expense reports, the oddly personal notes on merger documents, the faint scent of a different perfume on his suit jacket. "We need to hire a private investigator," Maya said flatly. "A real pro, someone who handles high-stakes corporate cases, someone who can turn these suspicions into irrefutable facts." Chloe nodded. The cold, heavy feeling in her stomach wasn't just dread anymore. It was igniting, not into a chaotic bonfire of despair, but into the focused, intense flame of resolve. "I didn't lose Leo. Isabel is trying to take him. There's a world of difference, and I am getting him back." That evening, Chloe couldn't sleep, but for the first time in months, it wasn't because of anxiety. It was from the quiet, intricate machinery of a plan locking into place in her mind. She lay there in the dark, one hand resting over her baby bump, and for the first time since the day Leo had looked at her with the eyes of a stranger, she felt something other than shattered. She felt a gathering strength. 600 miles away, in a penthouse office on the 63rd floor overlooking Lake Michigan, Leo Vance was swirling a glass of scotch at 2 in the morning, staring at the Chicago skyline without seeing a single light. Chloe didn't know this. She wouldn't know for a very long time. But one of Maya's friends from law school eventually told her in short, strained texts, "The way you'd report on a building being methodically dismantled, not a single sudden collapse, just one structural support giving way, then another, each piece of news more heartbreaking than the last." Leo had believed Isabel. That was the betrayal that cut the deepest. Not that Isabel had spun a web of lies, but that he had walked right into it without a moment's hesitation. Instantly, Isabel had appeared in his office, her face a perfect performance of feigned distress. She told him she'd uncovered a serious threat to the merger. "The leaks were real," she'd whispered. When she confronted Chloe about it, she confessed everything. She claimed she felt isolated by his ambition, that she was desperate for his attention, that she was planning to leave him anyway. Her exact words were, Isabel had lied, her eyes welling up with perfectly rehearsed tears. "Tell him I'm sorry, but I need to find my own life." Leo had tried to call Chloe. Every call was automatically rejected. Isabel explained Chloe had blocked his number, that she wanted no contact at all. And Leo believed her, because why would Isabel lie? She was his star analyst, his brilliant and driven right hand. He could imagine Chloe being overwhelmed by the pregnancy. He could see them arguing over his long hours, but he couldn't fathom this kind of manipulative, cruel accusation coming from the woman he loved. So he pulled back, the way men do when they've been conditioned to see emotional turmoil as a problem to be solved with avoidance. He stayed at the office. He skipped their nightly calls. He would stand on the unfinished trading floor of their new headquarters, letting the brutal Chicago wind tear at him until his face was numb, and then remain there as the city lights blurred below. His mentor found him asleep on the conference room sofa twice in the same week. A landmark merger that would redefine the industry was closing on the strength of his reputation alone, while he apathetically signed whatever financial models Isabel put in front of him. He stopped checking the fine print. At night, in the sterile silence of his office, he was haunted by Chloe. The way she'd tap her chin while researching a new acquisition for the museum. The way she organized their vinyl collection by decade and genre, creating a timeline of their life together. The night they tried to build a complicated crib and ended up laughing so hard they gave up, spreading out the blueprints and eating takeout on the living room floor. And now, all of that was tainted. Those moments felt poisoned, warped by Isabel's narrative of Chloe's supposed meltdown. The woman in those memories couldn't be the woman he was married to, or so he managed to convince himself. Chloe pieced most of this together from her brother, who heard it from a contact deep inside the firm. A young paralegal saw exactly what was happening. He watched Isabel manage a hollowed-out Leo, her attentiveness so constant and cloying it was like a cage. "It's like she's his keeper," he messaged Chloe's brother. "He's just a shell, and she's controlling everything." Chloe knew she had to get through to him, but not in any way Isabel could intercept. A message could be deleted. A phone call could be framed as harassment. She needed to present him with something he couldn't deny. Working with her brother and a friend who specialized in document verification, she didn't just write a letter. They built a case. They compiled it all into a single sealed portfolio, a physical record of the truth. It contained hotel folios showing Isabel had stayed in the room adjoining his in London. It contained screenshots of Isabel's deleted social media posts, filled with possessive captions about her work husband. It had corporate credit card statements showing Isabel had charged thousands of dollars in personal gifts to the merger's expense account. It had a notarized affidavit from a former assistant Isabel had bullied into quitting. It was a clear, undeniable chronology of a deliberate and calculated betrayal. Chloe typed a single cover letter, placed the portfolio in a courier box, and wrote a label with just 2 words: "The facts." The proof of Isabel's lies, the misappropriation of company funds for her lavish trips, the altered meeting minutes that erased Chloe's contributions to his initial pitch. She didn't beg or cry. She drafted one clear letter. She included the portfolio of evidence, organized, documented, and irrefutable. And at the bottom, she added one personal sentence: "I never cared about the merger. I never cared about the promotion. I wanted the man who stood with me in a dusty antique shop and argued about what our future would look like. If that man is still in there, he will know this is real." She sent it by bonded courier to his private office in Chicago. She knew he always personally signed for packages delivered that way, a security measure he'd had for years. The package arrived at his office 3 days later. A protocol, implemented by someone with executive authority, flagged it immediately. It looked at the sender's name, then at a standing instruction given by a senior partner with access to Leo's schedule, an instruction that provided a direct path to the shredder for any unsolicited personal deliveries during the merger's final week. The package was intercepted. 30 minutes later, a text message lit up a different phone. The confirmation of destruction was delivered not to Leo, but to the phone sitting on a cafe table a few streets away, Isabel's phone. Isabel read the confirmation message, all of it. She read it while sitting in a window seat, sipping an espresso and watching the people walk by. Then she saw the details of the contents from the security log. She put down her cup, sent a confirmation text back to security, and then deleted the entire exchange for good measure. We have a problem. Chloe didn't know the package had been destroyed. She waited. 1 day, 2, 5, a week. She called the courier for confirmation. She checked her phone for a missed call. She stared at the silence where an answer should have been. Nothing. He's not coming back. He saw the evidence, he knows the truth, and he still chose her. That was the realization that finally shattered her resolve. Not the lies, not the professional sabotage, not the fact that she was pregnant and on her own. It was the thought that Leo held the proof in his hands and simply threw it away. She didn't know he never even saw it. She never saw the demolition coming. Her life wasn't taken apart by a wrecking ball, but deleted in the space between a software patch and a catered lunch meeting. The ignorance was the cruelest part of the betrayal. A week after their last real conversation, Clara's world was shattered by a video link. It was a developer diary, a slickly produced feature on a major gaming news site about her husband Liam, the celebrated creative director of a Seattle game studio. He had his arm draped casually around Sasha, his lead concept artist. The title was a knife to the ribs, The Visionaries Crafting Tomorrow's Worlds. A well-meaning friend had sent it to her with a text that just said, Clara watched the video, a 10-minute montage of fawning interviews and behind-the-scenes footage celebrating their flawless creative synergy. They called her the academic wife, implying she was out of touch with his genius. Online forums were already dissecting the video, speculating about the end of her marriage based on a 10-minute marketing piece. Her own career as a landscape designer, built on quiet dedication and tangible results, suddenly felt flimsy. The city commission that had just awarded her the prestigious waterfront park project sent a terse email. In light of recent public developments, we're placing the contract on a temporary hold. Sasha's influence was a poison that spread faster than she could contain it. In less than 48 hours, the online rumors had become accepted fact. Clara Vance, the brilliant designer who couldn't even keep her own husband's attention. Clara stood in the humid air of her greenhouse, the angry buzzing of 1,000 online comments echoing in her head. It wasn't rage she felt, or even sadness, but a profound, bone-deep weariness, the kind that makes your blood feel like lead and your lungs ache with every breath. She turned away from her design table, covered in blueprints. She walked over to a bench of rare, hybrid orchids, a project she had spent years cultivating. She picked up a mister, the familiar weight of it cool in her hand, and began to tend to the delicate blossoms. The methodical, patient work of nurturing life, of coaxing beauty from a fragile stem, had always been her refuge. The rich, earthy smell of damp soil and green leaves was a balm against the digital stench of the outside world. With focused precision, she snipped away a single yellowing leaf, watching as the perfect symmetry of the plant was restored. The intense focus, the whisper of the water misting the petals, the slow, deliberate act of creation, it was her own form of meditation. Then, a sharp, insistent jab from inside her. The baby kicked, not the gentle flutters she was used to, but a firm, definite press of a tiny foot against her ribs. It was an ancient, wordless declaration. "I am here." Clara gasped, her hand flying to her belly. The greenhouse was silent, except for the hum of the ventilation fan. A small, secret smile formed on her lips, not because her world was fixed, but because she was growing something more permanent than the digital empire Liam was building on their ruins. 5 months. That was the reality she clung to. 5 months of a new life taking root inside her as her own was being torn out. She had just secured the funding for her own independent design studio, a foundation for the future she was planning. But just as she started to build, her own body began to fail her. It started with a pressure behind her eyes, a headache that squeezed her skull like a clamp. Then her ankles swelled, and tiny black spots danced in her vision like static. She knew. Before her doctor, a calm woman named Susan Chen, even said the word, she knew. Preeclampsia. It was early, which was good, but it was severe. Absolute bed rest, Dr. Chen instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Starting now, not after you send one more email. Now." "I can't," Clara said, her voice thin. "I have clients, deadlines. My studio funding depends on this work. Clara, if we don't get this blood pressure down, you'll be admitted to the hospital for the duration. This isn't a choice." Clara sat on the exam table, the paper crinkling beneath her. The fluorescent lights hummed. She could hear a heart monitor beeping steadily in the next room. "My new business insurance doesn't cover this for another month. We'll figure that out. Your job right now is to go home." Home. The condo was filled with his high-end gaming equipment, his designer clothes, his memory. Home, where no one would bring her food or check her vitals or be there if she fainted. She drove back from the clinic in a daze, rode the elevator up, and stepped into the suffocatingly quiet space. The faint scent of his expensive cologne clung to the air in the bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed they had shared, the silence amplifying the frantic panic in her mind. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. She scrolled past Liam's name, refusing to summon that ghost. She scrolled past the names of clients, city officials, suppliers, an entire professional life that was now on pause. And then she stopped on the name she was looking for. She pressed the screen. It rang twice. "Maya?" "Clara, what is it? You sound awful." How sisters always knew just from the tone of a single word. "I need you." Her older sister, Maya, didn't ask why. She just said, "I'm clearing my calendar. I'll be there before dawn." "Maya, it's a 3-hour flight from San Francisco. Then I'll be there before dawn. Don't argue." The line went dead. Clara rested her forehead against the cold glass of the hospital room window, watching the Seattle rain blur the city lights below. Her hand was a permanent fixture on the swell of her belly, where the baby was a constant, shifting warmth. Something had gone terribly wrong. Liam's stories about crunch time at the studio had been wearing thin for months, but this was a different level of deception. The cold dread had become a physical reality. 2 days after the bed rest order, her vision had tunneled and her head felt like it would split open. Her sister Maya had driven her to the emergency room, her Tesla navigating the rain-soaked streets with unnerving calm. They admitted her to the high-risk maternity ward for indefinite monitoring. Room 307. The hospital bed was a raft in a sea of anxiety. The steady electronic ping of the fetal heart monitor was a relentless clock, each beat counting down to an unknown future. Every 20 minutes, the blood pressure cuff inflated on her arm, a tight, impersonal squeeze. The room smelled of rubbing alcohol and dread. A nurse, all professional cheerfulness, came in to update her digital chart. She tapped at her tablet. "And do we have a contact number for the baby's father?" Clara stared at the glowing screen, at the empty field next to spouse and partner. Her fingers felt clumsy and disconnected as she typed a single word, none. The nurse's smile didn't falter as she reached for the thermometer. That night, under the ghostly light of the monitors, Clara found herself scrolling through the game studio's official fan forums on her laptop. She had deleted every picture of Liam, but the public record of their life was inescapable. The truth wasn't a single document, it was death by 1,000 comments. Fans had compiled a timeline of Liam and Sasha's creative romance, using convention photos and social media posts. The Dev Diary video was just the public announcement. Now, she was the one looking at apartment listings in Bellevue, one-bedrooms in complexes she'd never even noticed before. The photos were bleak. Tiny kitchens with cheap cabinets, living rooms that could barely fit a couch. She would stare at the screen, trying to figure out where a baby's crib could possibly go. Tucked into a corner by a drafty window? In the small space where a dining table was supposed to be? None of them had room. No room for a baby, no room for the life she had so meticulously planned. She slammed the laptop shut. The monitor next to her beeped, and the cuff on her arm started its slow, crushing inflation. The walls of the room seemed to be closing in. At 2:16 in the morning, Maya pushed open the door to room 307. She was still wearing a crisp, dark pantsuit, looking as though she'd come straight from a hostile takeover negotiation. She carried a leather briefcase and a thermos, and she had the look of a woman who had just spent a 6-hour flight dismantling a man's digital life for sport and would gladly do it again. She didn't speak at first. She set down the briefcase, put the thermos on the rolling table, and pulled the uncomfortable visitor's chair close to the bed. Then she just placed her hand on Clara's arm. Her touch wasn't soft or comforting. It was a simple point of contact, a solid, grounding weight in Clara's imploding universe. And that was the moment Clara finally broke. The terrified, humiliated sobs she had been swallowing for days tore out of her, a raw, ragged sound that shattered the sterile silence of the hospital wing. It was the sound of a woman who was done being strong, done being composed, done being the grown-up. Maya didn't say a thing. She didn't offer hollow reassurances that it would all be okay. She just sat there, a silent witness, and let her sister fall apart because she knew some betrayals were too vast for words. And sometimes a quiet presence is the only shield you can offer. When Clara's sobs finally subsided into ragged breaths, Maya handed her a bottle of water. "Okay," she said, her voice crisp. "Now let's discuss the shell corporation Liam registered 2 months ago in Sasha's name." Even here in the hushed, antiseptic air of the hospital, Maya was a woman who operated on facts, not feelings. Outside, the rain had turned the city into a glittering smear of light. "I'm having this baby by myself," Clara whispered, the words raw in her throat. "That's the only thing that's real right now. This baby doesn't know about intellectual property theft or secret bank accounts. He just knows my heartbeat, and my heartbeat is fighting to stay strong." She looked at her sister. He was stealing my ideas for the game, wasn't he? Maya's jaw was a tight line. How did you guess? It wasn't just the affair. You found proof. He has a private server with project files. He's been feeding her your design concepts for the game's environmental art. He knows about your high-risk appointments, and he knows it's a boy. Maya was quiet for a moment, the only sound the soft whirring of the machines. Then a thin, dangerous smile crossed her face. Perfect, she said. A man that arrogant always thinks he's too smart to get caught. At 7 months pregnant, Chloe's temporary loft in Lincoln Park always smelled of either old books or the jasmine tea she drank constantly. She was standing in the corner she designated as the nursery. The space was too small for a separate room, but she'd hung a heavy velvet curtain to create a cozy alcove by the oversized window. She was painting a series of constellations on the wall behind where the crib would go, a map of the night sky. Her hair was piled on top of her head, and a streak of silver paint was drying on her cheek. Her feet were swollen, her hips ached without pause, and her doctor would have been furious about her being on a stepladder, but she had to do this. The steady, quiet work of creating a peaceful, ordered universe in a life that had become so ugly and chaotic. Her brother Mark had taken over the spare room for now, which they both knew meant until the baby arrived. He made sure she had groceries, he argued with her landlord for her, and every day he took calls from her small dining table. He would hang up from those calls with legal terms, new strategies, and finally, a recommendation. Olivia Marlowe. She was in her late 40s, had a reputation for being a shark, and her law office overlooking the river felt like a fortress built of glass and steel. Her office, overlooking the Chicago River, was all glass and steel, but Eleanor Vance preferred her tea served in a heavy ceramic mug. She was the lawyer who dismantled the Harrison media empire during their family feud 3 years prior, leaving the patriarch with little more than his company's stock ticker symbol. That's a big problem for him, not for me, she'd stated with a thin smile when Chloe's friend Ben had called her. The official line is that I can't represent you. The truth is, Mark's managing partner tried to bury me in paperwork during the Harrison case to protect one of his clients. It cost me a vacation. I hold on to things like that. She didn't elaborate, and Chloe understood. Some grudges are their own resumes. Ben had set up his tablet on Chloe's dining room table, pushing aside her scattered branding mock-ups. He methodically walked Eleanor through his findings. The first red flag, a recurring charge at a high-end florist Chloe had never heard of. Then, the deeper dive, flight itineraries for 2 to Aspen, booked with their shared airline miles. Finally, the smoking gun, a complex series of wire transfers siphoned from their savings into a newly registered LLC with an anonymous name, all originating from Mark's work IP address. Eleanor swiped through every screenshot, every booking confirmation, every financial statement with the laser-focused calm of a bomb squad technician inspecting a device. This was, in its own way, about to be an explosion. When she was done, she set the tablet down. Her gaze met Chloe's. "This isn't just him having a fling," she said, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "This is a premeditated theft of your shared future. And using your joint capital to fund his exit strategy, that's not just disrespectful, it's ammunition. We're not just talking about a separation. We're seeking an immediate asset freeze and filing a suit for financial damages." The weight of her words settled into the quiet room. "Where do we start?" Chloe asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We start with silence. The second Mark thinks you're onto him, he'll start burying the money deeper. I'm filing an emergency petition with the court first thing in the morning. It will lock down every account he has access to. He won't be able to buy a cup of coffee with your money." "Won't he know something is wrong?" "Oh, he'll know," Eleanor said, a predatory smile flashing across her face. "But by the time his card gets declined at the hotel in Aspen, it will be far too late." Chloe nodded, her eyes finding Ben, who was leaning against the counter, his jaw tight. His expression was a storm of contained fury and fierce loyalty. The days that followed were wrapped in a silence that screamed. Chloe took on new freelance clients. She organized the pantry. She read articles on newborn sleep schedules. She transferred the $350 from her latest invoice into a new private bank account. It was a beginning. On a Tuesday, she visited a small baby boutique downtown. The store was warm and smelled of lavender, and she moved slowly between racks of tiny clothes, a hand resting on her swollen belly. The baby was restless, his jabs and rolls a constant secret rhythm against her ribs. At the checkout, the young woman ahead of her was struggling with a fussy toddler on her hip. She tried to buy a single soft swaddling blanket with a pattern of little stars. Her debit card was declined. She tried it again. Declined. A deep blush spread across her cheeks as she searched her bag, while the cashier offered a practiced, hollow sympathy that felt worse than annoyance. The woman finally gave up, pushing the blanket back. Chloe picked up an identical blanket and placed it on the counter with her own set of newborn hats. In the lobby, she saw the woman wrestling the child into a stroller. "Excuse me," Chloe said, holding out the small bag. The woman looked at her, then at the star-patterned blanket, and then her eyes fixed on Chloe's very pregnant form. "I don't understand. Why?" she asked, her voice tight with bewilderment. "I just know," Chloe said with a sad smile. "It felt like you needed one less thing to worry about." The woman took the bag, and for a heartbeat, they just looked at each other. No thanks were offered, no more words were needed. It was a stark moment of connection, a silent acknowledgement of the battles fought in plain sight. Driving home, the air in her car, usually filled with the scent of leather and a clean linen spray, now felt stale with betrayal. A vapid pop song was on the radio, and Chloe found herself humming, a strange, unnerving calm taking root in her chest. That night, Mark called from his conference. His voice had an artificial energy, a forced enthusiasm that grated on her nerves. "I was just networking with some potential investors," he began. "One of them is really into this new fintech venture I've been sketching out. Someone who really gets the long-term vision." Chloe's hand clenched her phone, the plastic creaking under the pressure. The venture was a lie. He was lying. "And?" she prompted, her voice eerily calm. "And I think we're close to getting seed funding," Mark said, the triumph in his voice making her sick. "This could set us up for life, Chloe." She closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the cool kitchen wall. The baby delivered a sharp, sudden kick, as if protesting the lie it was being told. "I've got more news," Mark continued. "I finally promoted Isabel." He gave her the senior analyst title this afternoon. What? He said it was time to restructure the team, to elevate the top performers. Said his partner suggested it, to present a more dynamic front to the market. 2 team leads, a new power couple for the division, makes the firm's flat performance last year look like a distant memory. "What did Isabel say?" Chloe asked, her voice hollow. "She was thrilled, said it was the highlight of her career. Then she made a dinner reservation for them at Alinea to celebrate." A heavy silence stretched across the line, punctuated by the low hum of the refrigerator. "She wants to be supportive, Chloe. She sent me a text, and I'm reading it now. Whatever I can do to help you guys through this exciting time, just ask." Chloe opened her eyes. Her warm, inviting kitchen, with the scent of the risotto she'd been making, suddenly felt like a war room. The whimsical animal decals she'd applied to the nursery walls seemed like tiny, silent soldiers. For weeks, she had been drowning in doubt, swallowing excuses, steeling herself for the next half-truth. She'd been playing defense while Mark was methodically liquidating their life together. That was over. "Tell Sasha I need Mark's corporate cloud login," Chloe said, her voice flat and cold. "I need access to his full account, specifically the drafts folder in his email and his calendar archives, any deleted items that can establish a timeline." "That's a huge ask," Ben said quietly over their encrypted chat. "She's his direct report now. Her desk is literally right outside his glass-walled office, which means she has access. If she gets caught, Ben warned, she'll be fired and blacklisted, and your whole case could get thrown out. Then, Chloe said, her gaze sweeping over the small, perfect world she had so carefully built, she'll have to be incredibly careful. Sasha, her young ally from the firm, met her in a bustling coffee shop. She looked terrified, a nervous wreck in the crowded cafe. She wasn't holding a laptop. She slid a small, encrypted flash drive across the table. "Chloe, I'm so sorry," she breathed, her eyes darting around the room. "You need to see this." Back in her car, Chloe plugged the drive into her tablet. It contained a password-protected folder. Inside wasn't a video, but a document. It was a business plan for a new firm, M&I Investments, Mark and Isabel, and it was funded entirely by the LLC that had drained their savings. Buried deeper was a subfolder. It contained a series of email drafts from Mark to Isabel professing his love. It showed his search history for diamond engagement rings, and finally, a screenshot sent to a contact labeled Isabel, a picture of a 3-carat ring with the caption, "For our future." Her friend had stumbled upon the folder while searching for a legitimate work file. This wasn't a mistake. It was a meticulous blueprint for her erasure. The truth wasn't in a diary. It was in a mislabeled cloud backup from a burner phone titled Napa Project. It was the digital ghost of a whole other life. A complete archive of every message, every picture, a staggering 20 gigabytes of data Chloe had downloaded onto a fresh hard drive. She possessed every single word, every empty promise Liam had whispered to Isabella, every future they had mapped out, every lie he had constructed, and she saved it all. The fake investment conference itineraries were there too, meticulously crafted in 3 different versions. The first was clumsy, with flight numbers that didn't exist and hotel reservations that overlapped, the kind of lie a single curious email could dismantle. The second was cleaner. The third was a masterpiece, airtight and utterly convincing. Liam had practiced his betrayal, refining the details until it was a flawless performance. And then the texts, a cold, clipped exchange between Liam and his old fraternity brother, Ben. Liam, "The junior analyst is on board. C is clueless." Ben, "Smooth." "What about Chloe's baby shower?" Liam, "It's at the end of the month. Buy something flashy. She's into big statements." Ben, "I always go big." Chloe mirrored everything onto 3 separate drives. One for her, one for the divorce attorney she'd already retained, and a third for a safe deposit box to which only her sister held a key. The next morning, she had the network password changed. A simple, surgical strike. Every ounce of Liam's access to their smart thermostat, their joint investment portfolio, their entire connected existence was severed. The password change alert pinged Liam's phone at exactly 10:32 a.m., and his assistant later confided to a friend of Chloe's that the color drained from his face. Ben knew by noon. Liam's parents knew by 3. His mistress knew by 5. And by the next morning, Liam was back in Chicago. He stood on the steps of their Lincoln Park brownstone, the very home where he'd promised Chloe a lifetime just a year before. He looked hollowed out. The effort of his double life had worn him thin. His expensive tailored suits seemed to hang off his frame. His eyes had the exhausted, haunted look of a man who'd been running on pure adrenaline for months. He called Chloe about the Wi-Fi. She was in the living room, sipping chamomile tea and flipping through a cookbook she had no intention of using. It was a masterclass in feigned normalcy. "It's just a complication," Chloe said, her voice chillingly calm. "That girl is trying to cause trouble in our marriage. It's what desperate people do." Desperate people. People who don't belong. Liam stared at his phone, his own exhausted face reflected on the dark screen. He felt like he was 80 years old, aged by his own web of lies. He had managed his affair with the detached precision of a hedge fund manager, admiring the risk profile but never truly considering the human cost. He had spent their entire marriage chasing her praise and receiving, in exchange, her quiet, unwavering loyalty. "I need to see the texts," he demanded. "It was all in the files from the Napa trip, the proof she was scheming against you. Your friend Ben wiped all of that." "Then I want to hear it from Ben." "Liam, darling, this is beneath you. Let the lawyers handle it." But Liam was already out of his office, moving through the high-rise lobby and into his car. The car was his fortress. Tinted windows, German leather, the faint smell of stale coffee and raw ambition. It was the same car where he had driven Chloe on cool autumn nights. She loved indie folk. He loved classic jazz. They would drive for hours, her hand resting on his thigh, enveloped in a comfortable silence. He drove toward the West Loop, to the street where Chloe used to run her first pop-up kitchen. A few of her favorite things were still displayed in the windows of a culinary shop. She had left them: a set of vintage copper pans, a well-loved copy of a book on French sauces. And wedged in his sun visor, behind a wad of parking stubs, was a photograph, Chloe and Liam, on their second anniversary. They were at a winery in Michigan. She was holding an absurdly large glass of rosé. He was laughing at something witty she had just said. A server they had charmed had taken the photo. On the back, in her graceful script, was a single sentence: "Thank you for actually seeing me." He gazed at the picture for what felt like an eternity. The daylight inside the car faded from gold to gray. The city skyline started to glitter. He remembered that was her line. The first thing she said in the ER after he'd slipped on the ice and broken his wrist, the first thing that made him realize he was falling in love. "You look at me like you actually get me." Liam flipped the photograph over, examining her face, then his. The unguarded happiness in it. The kind of pure joy that only comes when you feel completely understood by another person. He tried to reconcile that woman with the one his friend had described. The jealous, paranoid wife, the schemer, the woman who allegedly said, "Tell him he got exactly what he deserved." It didn't compute. The two images wouldn't align, like trying to jam together pieces from two entirely different puzzles. He tried her old mobile number, the one he used to dial a dozen times a day. A recorded voice informed him it was no longer in service. He called the landlord of the apartment they'd rented before buying the brownstone. A new couple lived there now. They didn't recognize her name. Every trail leading back to the woman he thought he knew had been systematically erased. Not haphazardly, but with intent. With the cold, clean efficiency of a demolition crew leveling a building. He had never once tried to contact her directly after their fight. He'd let his friend run interference. He had trusted him, and they had taken that trust and turned it into a weapon aimed right at him. Sunday brunch, the family estate in Lake Forest. Linen tablecloths, heirloom silver, the antique china his mother reserved for occasions where appearances mattered more than feelings. His father was at one end of the table, his mother at the other, his brother seated opposite him. The table was set for 12. With only 4 of them, it felt like a cavern. Liam set his phone down, screen up. It displayed the photo from the car, Chloe with the wine glass, his own laughing face, her handwriting on the back. He didn't raise his voice. He did not slam his hand on the polished mahogany. He spoke in a low tone, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm breaks. "Where is she?" His brother looked at the phone. His teacup paused midway to his lips. He took a deliberate sip. "Who?" "You know who." His mother gently blotted her mouth with her napkin. "Liam, this is hardly the appropriate time." "Where is Chloe? What did you do? And don't you dare lie to me, because I have spent the last year believing every single word you told me, and the woman in this picture is not a schemer." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that pressed down on the room. His brother picked at a scone. His father examined his eggs Benedict. His mother toyed with her pearl necklace. Then his father spoke. The man who had not voiced a contrary opinion in 30 years. The man who signed the checks his wife presented and attended the charity balls she organized and played the part of the patriarch like a weary actor in a long-running play. His father looked up from his plate, met his younger son's gaze, and uttered 6 words that brought the family's entire performance crashing down. Tell him, Catherine, or so help me, I will. His father's jaw was set. His mother stared at her husband, her expression shifting into something Liam had never seen but recognized instantly. For a brief second, her immaculate composure shattered like a hairline crack appearing in a perfect porcelain vase. Richard, don't. No, not this time. I let you manage the corporate merger. I let you manage the firm's image. I let you manage every single thing because it was easier than arguing with you. But this, our son is self-destructing over a lie we helped create. And now there's a child. That word landed in the room with the force of an anchor. What child? Liam asked. The silence was absolute. The tall case clock in the foyer chimed the hour. She was standing in the center of what was soon to be her restaurant's kitchen when she heard the knocking. 8 months pregnant. Exposed brick walls surrounded her. A 6-burner stove she had found at an auction was still wrapped in protective plastic. A set of custom-made light fixtures lay coiled on a workbench, waiting to be installed. The knock wasn't aggressive or loud, just 3 firm raps, the kind someone makes when they aren't entirely sure they are at the right place. Her sister, Sophie, went to the door. She opened the heavy steel door only a crack, looking through the narrow opening like a sentry at a gate. Liam was standing in the industrial hallway. He was wearing a custom suit that likely cost more than her entire kitchen's plumbing. His hair was cut much shorter than she remembered. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked like a man who hadn't slept for a week and had just learned that his entire world was built on a lie. Sophie didn't move to let him in. "You don't get to show up here and be the savior," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She already saved herself. Liam opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't argue. He didn't try to force his way past her. He just stood in the hallway, accepting the verdict from a woman he'd never met, who was now blocking his way with the unyielding strength of a seawall. "I know," he said. "I know I'm too late. I know I should have dug deeper, called more, tried harder. I know all of it. And I know that knowing it doesn't fix a single thing. Then why are you here?" "Because she deserves to hear the truth from my mouth, not from a lawyer's brief, not in a court document, from me." Sophie watched him for a long, silent moment. She had the sharp, discerning gaze of a trial lawyer who had spent 15 years taking apart witnesses on the stand. The truthful ones, the crumbling ones, the dangerous ones, and the ones who were simply broken. She stepped aside, not all the way, just enough. And Chloe emerged from behind her. She was in a pair of old sweatpants and one of his college sweatshirts. The fabric stretched taut over her belly. Her hair was piled on top of her head, and her face was bare and pale. It was the kind of deep, weary exhaustion you couldn't fake, the reality of being 32 weeks pregnant. The sight of her hit Mark like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a theoretical baby anymore. This was Chloe, the woman he loved, carrying their son in the here and now. He stood frozen for a beat, then another, a full 30 seconds passing in the silence of the half-finished nursery that smelled of low VOC paint and new carpet, just staring. He wasn't seeing the obstacle his lawyer had painted her as, but the woman who had once driven 2 hours in a snowstorm with a box of his favorite donuts because he was stuck working on a deadline. "Chloe, don't say my name like that, like I'm some document you misfiled and just found. You didn't misfile me, Mark. You shredded me. There's a huge difference." He flinched. It was a small, nearly invisible spasm in his jaw, but she saw it. She always saw the things he tried to hide. "You're right," he said, his voice cracking. "I did. I bought her entire story, without asking you a single question, without a hint of skepticism, without doing the one thing I was paid millions to do, question the data. Why was it so easy for you to believe her, Leo?" The question came from Chloe as she leaned against the counter of her new, unfamiliar kitchen. He looked smaller, stripped of his expensive suits and the confidence they provided. "Why did you just accept it?" Chloe pushed a lock of hair from her eyes, her hand instinctively resting on her pregnant belly. Believing her was simple, Leo. You spent the last year obsessed with closing that deal. You were a ghost in our own home. You left a void, and someone like Isabel was more than happy to step into it. Her lies weren't the attack. They were just the confirmation that you were already gone. He winced. I know. My God, do you think I don't know that now? I was a fool. She played on every single one of my worst fears. He took a hesitant step toward her. Part of me wants to tell you to leave, and the other part knows that if I ever let you back in, I need to know you've learned how to fight for what we have, and honestly right now, I don't think you even remember how. And I can't do this with you anymore, Marcus. I gave you the source code to our life, and you just handed it over to her, letting her write me out of my own story. Marcus didn't crumple onto a minimalist couch in their shared Seattle loft. He slid down the cool concrete wall of the co-working space she now called her office, his tech CEO hoodie bunching around his waist. There was no dramatic breakdown, just the silent, heavy collapse of a man who finally understood the full scope of his betrayal. Eliza watched him, the man she had built a world with, the man who had burned it down, now looking completely broken in the small indie studio she was building from the ashes. She pulled the frosted glass door shut. It didn't slam, it slid into its frame with a soft, final click, the quiet sound of a woman who no longer needed to raise her voice to be heard. Inside, she rested her forehead against the cool glass. Her sister, Hannah, was hunched over a laptop, debugging a line of code. He's still out there, Hannah noted, her eyes fixed on the screen. I know. How long are you going to leave him on the sidewalk? Eliza's voice was solid. As long as it takes for me to decide if I ever want to unlock this door for him again. The weeks that followed weren't a courtship. They were a data analysis. Marcus didn't plead. He didn't flood her phone with desperate voicemails. He didn't appear with bouquets or have his lawyers send over partnership agreements. He used his industry connections to get a prototype of a new VR headset she'd been trying to acquire for months delivered to her studio. He didn't include a note. Eliza returned from a demoralizing pitch meeting to find that the studio's notoriously unstable server, which 2 IT consultants had given up on, had been quietly optimized and secured by a top-tier network engineer. There was no email, no claim of responsibility, just the reassuring hum of a stable development environment. He would sit in a cafe across the street when she had her ultrasound appointments. She never invited him in. He never asked to join. Hannah eventually started giving him a short, sharp nod when she saw him, which for Hannah was the equivalent of signing a peace treaty. She hadn't forgiven him, and she definitely didn't trust him, but she did plug in the new headset, a silent admission that was the closest he'd get to an olive branch. The reckoning at Oracle Games didn't happen with a dramatic firing, but with a viral post on an industry insider's blog. Liam, a veteran programmer who had been mentored by Eliza early in her career, laid out the entire timeline in a devastatingly detailed article. Marcus's boss, the head of the studio, was named. So was Chloe. So were the 10 other executives who had benefited from the studio's success. Liam was methodical. He embedded screenshots one by one, the original design documents with Eliza's time-stamped metadata, the server logs showing Chloe accessing the files after hours, the Slack messages between the studio head and Chloe discussing how to rebrand the concept, the shell company created to handle the marketing budget that funneled kickbacks to them both. Liam never used inflammatory language. The evidence did all the shouting. The studio head was forced into an immediate public resignation by the board of directors. No lawsuit, not yet, but he was effectively blacklisted. He lost his title, his stock options, his reserve parking space, and his corner office with the view of Puget Sound. Chloe was informed that her employment was terminated, effective immediately, and that her name was now toxic in the Seattle tech scene. Permanently was the word a source used. The unspoken meaning was forever. A junior artist who had seen the original concept art gave an anonymous quote to the blog. She was quoted describing every early sketch she had been asked to create, every innovative game mechanic she'd heard Eliza pitch that was later dismissed, and every doubt she had swallowed to keep her job. Her fear was palpable in the text, but her conviction was clear. Later that week, she sent Eliza a message on LinkedIn with 9 words. "I don't know if this helps, but I'm sorry." Eliza replied with 4 words. "You were brave." That evening, Eliza sat on the small balcony of her new apartment. It was a cramped space, but from her chair, she could see the glowing Ferris wheel on the pier and a patch of sky turning from a hazy orange to the deep, dusky blue that signaled the real end of the day. She sipped a peppermint tea from a mug that said, "World's Okayest Coder," her other hand resting on her belly. The baby kicked, a firm, insistent nudge, a new variable in her code. She sat there for what seemed like hours, not thinking about Marcus, not thinking about Chloe or the studio, or the professional implosion that was now echoing through the industry. She was thinking about absolutely nothing, which, after a year of overthinking every single thing, felt like the most profound peace she had ever experienced. The city lights flickered to life. A fairy horn blared in the distance. Someone cheered on a neighboring balcony. Eliza felt a smile spread across her face. Not because the bugs were all fixed. They weren't. Her life was a messy, brilliant, uncompiled project. But she was still here on a balcony with a cup of tea and a baby who was scheduled for release in about 4 weeks, whether the rest of the world was ready for him or not. She once believed that strength was about enduring attacks, about smiling through the pain as if it didn't exist. Now she knew strength was about sorting through the wreckage and building something from scratch, something that was entirely hers, a new world that no one could corrupt or take away from her. The baby arrived on a Monday. It would be a Monday. Marcus had told her his devastating truth on a Monday. She had moved out that Tuesday. But the baby reclaimed Monday for himself, and she decided to let him, to let the day be a new beginning. The labor lasted 22 hours. It was nothing like you see in movies. It was a grueling, exhausting siege, a tribute to the quiet power every woman who goes through it comes to understand. Her sister, Hannah, gripped one of her hands. Her best friend, Sophie, held the other. They worked in shifts. Hannah was there for the start, when the contractions were like a rising tide and the room was still relatively calm. Sophie tagged in for the hardest part, when the pain crashed over her in relentless waves, and Eliza squeezed her hands so tightly Sophie thought her fingers might break. Marcus was at the hospital. He was there for one reason only, because Eliza had made the explicit choice to let him be. Not because he had a right to be, not because of some family obligation, but because she had looked at him, truly looked at him, and made a decision. He stood in the sterile hallway of the maternity ward, holding a duffel bag filled with things he thought she might want, and in that instant, she saw a version of him she had never seen before. This wasn't Marcus Thorne, the rock star creative director from Oracle Games, not the coding prodigy who built entire universes, not the man who had sacrificed their life together for his lead designer. He was just a man terrified and lost, on the verge of becoming a father, horrified of being in that room and even more horrified of being locked out of it forever. "You can come in," she had said, her voice quiet but firm. He entered and collapsed into the chair by the window, a silent observer of his own life's cutscene. He didn't speak unless she spoke to him, didn't offer his hand unless she gestured for it, didn't try to be the hero of the story. At 4:21 p.m., Noah Hayes was born. 6 pounds and 9 ounces, with a shock of dark hair and eyes the color of the deep, hazy gray of a Seattle morning. His hands were so impossibly tiny, less like actual hands and more like rough sketches of them. Eliza held him first, feeling the solid warm weight of him on her chest, his heartbeat a new rhythm against her own as they synced up for the first time in the open air. She studied his miniature face, and he gazed back with the ancient, unfocused stare of a soul that had just logged into a world that was still rendering. "Hello?" she whispered. "I'm your mom. I've been waiting for you." She named him Noah Hayes, not Noah Thorne. Her sister Hannah held him next. She settled into the armchair, cradling the newborn, and began to hum a tune Eliza remembered from their childhood. A simple melody their grandmother used to sing when the afternoon rains would start, something about boats safe in the harbor. Hannah's voice wasn't flawless. It was soft and a little shaky, heavy with love. It was the only sound in the room that mattered. Marcus held him last. Eliza watched his face as the nurse gently placed Noah into his arms. She saw the change, the complete deconstruction and rebuilding of a man's entire being in the space of a few seconds. He said nothing. He just looked down at his son, who stared back with that same infinite, unseeing gaze, and Marcus began to weep. It wasn't a loud breakdown, just a quiet, relentless stream of tears carving paths down his face, each one landing on the baby's blanket with the softest sound, like a leak from a foundation that could never be repaired. "He has your eyes," Liam whispered, his voice cracking. "No," Chloe replied, her tone hushed but firm. "He has his own." Ben Carter, the film's executive producer and Liam's mentor, showed up at the hospital the following afternoon. He came alone, his bespoke suit looking utterly out of place amidst the bright pastels of the maternity ward. The man who could greenlight a $10 million project on a handshake suddenly seemed small and uncertain, lost in the hum of machines and the cries of new life. He held Owen with a cautious tenderness, as if handling fragile, irreplaceable film. "I should have put a stop to it," Ben said, his eyes on the infant, but his words aimed at Chloe. "I saw the way he and Nina were. I didn't intervene. I called it creative intensity, convinced myself the pressure of the deadline was just making things complicated." He sighed, a long, hollow sound. "That's no excuse. It's just what happened." Chloe listened as the industry titan confessed his own complicity, all while cradling her son. "I'm not asking you to forgive my silence," Ben continued, "but I need you to know this. This little man is a remarkable new story, and he will always have an advocate in me." Chloe managed a small, sharp nod. She could not say, "It's okay," because it wasn't. But seeing him hold her child, hearing the profound weight of his regret, felt like the first survey marker being hammered into the ground for a new beginning. For now, that was enough. Nina did not visit the hospital. She sent a package via courier, not a gift basket, but a framed, limited edition vinyl of the film's score, the kind that was pressed for awards voters and had no business being near a newborn, a trophy from an actress playing a part. Chloe looked at it. Her sister, Jess, looked at it. "You want me to test this thing's aerodynamics from the window?" Jess asked. "Just make it disappear." Jess got rid of it, but she kept the heavy oak frame. It made an excellent prop for a wobbly bookcase. Maria, Chloe's oldest friend, came by after her shift. She brought a worn, beloved copy of a classic children's book and a thermos of her amazing spiced cider. "For the little guy," Maria said, setting the book down. "He'll need it when I begin his education in chaos. Because I say this with all the love in my heart, your idea of fun is alphabetizing your spice rack." "I can be spontaneous," Chloe countered weakly. "You're precise. It's a valuable skill. That's why he has his Auntie Maria for everything else." Chloe laughed. The sound was foreign in her own ears, startling not because it was loud, but because it was real. It was a true laugh, erupting from a place she feared had been permanently leveled. In the weeks that came after, the professional fallout rippled outward. Murmurs and cryptic social media posts echoed through Seattle's film scene. Former colleagues picked sides. Email chains went cold and partnerships grew tense. The slow, painful process of a private heartbreak becoming public domain. Nina was put on an extended assignment in the London office, a move from the studio that was a solution masquerading as a promotion, but the evidence of their affair was absolute. It hadn't been found on a bar tab. It was discovered by Chloe herself on Liam's editing drive. Buried deep in the project files was a password-protected folder containing a series of voice memos, an audio diary. They were late-night, intimate conversations with Nina, a chronicle of their emotional affair, and a trip to a cabin on Orcas Island. A digital confession that was now a story being whispered all over town. The myth of their perfect creative partnership was exposed for the fiction it was. But this was the one truth Chloe clung to, the fact that anchored her. She was never competing with them. She knew nothing of Nina's blinding ambition, or Liam's devastating weakness, or the seven-figure stakes of their film. She was not a supporting character in their movie. She was never a pawn in their endgame. She was a woman who loved a storyteller, who was carrying his son, who had her world collapse, and who was now storyboarding a new one from scratch. The drama of the acclaimed director and his composer was a tragedy playing on a screen that was entirely separate from her own life. She was carrying their son, but she was not carrying the burden of their decisions. She was carrying Owen. 3 weeks after he was born, a courier delivered a large document tube to her new rental. Inside was a stack of legal papers. Liam had signed over 100% of the rights and all future earnings from his first documentary, the small, gritty film he made in college that launched his entire career, into an irrevocable trust for Owen. The trust was to be managed by an independent firm, with Chloe named as the sole guardian with complete control. It was the total abdication of his proudest accomplishment, done without a single email, with no conditions, and without Chloe ever asking for a thing. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on a torn piece of a script. "I can't fix the story I ruined," it said, "but I can give him the beginning I failed to give you, and I will use whatever time I have to try and earn a role in his life." Chloe read the note at the small kitchen table in her apartment, Owen asleep in the bassinet she had assembled with a screwdriver and an online video. Her sister was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. The rain tapped against the window, a gentle, familiar rhythm. She read the note once more, folded it carefully, and put it in a wooden box that held her father's old light meter and a ticket stub from the first film festival she and Liam had attended together. She did not text him, not that night, but she did not throw the note out. An hour later, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Maria. It was a photo of the old children's book, now on a shelf in Maria's apartment, next to a framed picture of them at graduation. Beaming, oblivious to the complex lives ahead of them, the text below it read, "Keeping this safe for the little monster. Based on his iron grip, he'll be ready to direct his first demolition project by Saturday." Chloe laughed again. That was twice in one day. A personal best. She set her phone down, walked over to the bassinet, and just watched her son sleep. His tiny hands were curled into fists, his mouth making the smallest of movements as if dreaming. A kick, a tiny, insistent thump against her ribs, made Chloe smile. At 7 months pregnant, their son was already making his demands. The scent of coffee and rain filled their Seattle loft, a city perfume she'd always loved. She should have been off her feet, but she was organizing the final assets for Liam's latest documentary submission. He was the city's most promising documentarian, on the cusp of something huge. Asterisk. Their asterisk moment felt so close. A swell of pride hit her as she double-checked the audio files. That's when she saw it. A password-protected folder on his main drive she'd never seen before, labeled Audioscapes. Figuring it held Nina's final sound designs, she typed in their usual shared password and opened it. But it wasn't music. It was a list of voice memos. Dozens of them, recorded late at night, featuring Liam and Nina, the film's brilliant composer. They were talking, laughing, planning a future that didn't include her, in a cabin he claimed he was visiting for a solo work retreat. It was an affair of the mind, the heart, and the soul. A searing, corrosive jealousy rose in her chest. The new life she was nurturing, the future she thought they were scripting together, was just a lie told to a trusting audience. Their beautiful home, their celebrated partnership, was just the film he showed the world, while the director's cut, the real story, was being told somewhere else, to someone else. Her hand went to her belly as the baby kicked again, a sharp, frantic rhythm against her palm. Their son knew nothing of secret recordings or broken promises, or the vast empty space that had just opened up in their picture-perfect life. All he knew was the sudden, jarring beat of his mother's breaking heart. He was the only honest part of this entire production, the only story that was entirely hers, and that would have to be more than enough.